Peace, peace. You know what it is. It's your man SKYZOO Skyzoo, live out the borough. And this is the NBA Exchange with my man Dexter Henry. You know how you doing it, man. Log on, tap in. Let's get into it.
What's good, everybody? Happy Friday. Your boy Dexter Henry here for the NBA Exchange. Got a good one today. If you're looking at this, you come in the middle of this show, you're listening, you might think it's an episode of the Ain't Hard to Sell podcast, but it's not that. It'll be me with my co-host from the Ain't Hard to Sell podcast, Bryan Fonseca. You've been following him. He's been doing a lot of things because, we got to be out here grinding. You know how we doing. Some of y'all ain't grinding, but we are. That's for sure. He does work for FanDuel, making sure everything's right for y'all with the betting on that. So we're going to do a little betting and picks with my man, Bryan Fonseca. He also does some work for 5 Reasons Sports, hosts a show with our guy, the Bahama Rican Boys. Really good show. Y'all should check that out, along with all the other good content they do on 5 Reasons Sports. It is a really dope one. My man, Bryan Fonseca here joining me. B, what's up, man?
Working, as you said. I've had a good week. I can't lie to you. I've had a nice week, and I'm looking forward to sort of sitting back watching some games this weekend before recharging for next week. But all is well. Can't complain much.
All is well and good. Reason Brian's here, if people don't know yet, is to talk about the Miami Heat. That's what we're talking about. This is a team. I don't want to say near and dear to his heart. That's maybe a little bit too much.
That's strong. Yeah, no. I did not grow up on this or whatever. I just as I often say about the Heat, they continue to get players I like. They continue to do things that I like.
Right.
So it's hard not to like what they're doing and who they are, and just the makeup and the team building, and respect what they've done organizationally since I've been a child, really, because they've been relevant my entire life.
Yeah, can't say that about some other teams, including some teams I root for. Not always been relevant. That is for sure. But Brian loves the ethos of this team. He loves what they're about. He's all about hashtag Heat culture. Now, it's not like, some other people that just got the team in their bio, and, Brian has a whole theory on that stuff and how that goes. It ain't that. we won't say that. But we're going to talk a little about the Heat. The Heat, they will be the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. That is settled. There's a lot of talk about whether they're the top team or not. Brian, so they're going to be the number 1 seed in the East here. I'm going to say this. I think you got to look at this and say this is very impressive. Sometimes we don't give enough credit to Erik Spoelstra and the work that he's done. It can get overlooked. I'm sure you know this too. But how big of an accomplishment is it that this team, that I don't think anybody picked to finish number 1 in the East, finished number 1 in the East? How big of an accomplishment is that?
Yeah, I thought they were going to finish 3rd, I think, when we were talking about this early on. And I was saying, the goal should be finish in that top half just so you're at home for at least the first series. And now you're going to be home for the entire playoffs, assuming you get to the Eastern Conference Finals. And at Game 7, you're going to have that on your floor. And that's big, considering that you could be very well facing the Milwaukee Bucks or Boston Celtics, which we'll get to later. But, yeah, I think it's a big accomplishment, because if you said to anybody, to me, whoever, Jimmy Butler's going to miss 20-something games. Bam's going to miss 20-something games. Tyler Hero's going to miss a bunch of games. Kyle Lowry's going to be out multiple times due to personal reasons. And guys are just going to be missing games, and those are your top 4 players. And then just injuries up and down the roster, that they were still going to be the 1 seed and basically be on track to be, 53-29 or 54-28, 52-30, whatever they end up. Right now they're 52-28 at the time of this recording. That's impressive. I thought they'd be a 50-win team, but I didn't think they'd get beyond that much. And I thought that 50 would afford them 3rd seed or something along those lines. So to be in a position where you can be 54-28 now, they don't need to win anymore. So they may just start sitting guys and resting for the playoffs. It's a hell of an accomplishment for the organization. And I don't think it's something to be slept on too, because this team, we talk about, I love role players, gritty guys, and I don't think talent is necessarily everything. But in terms of the talent, they don't have the same top-end talent as some of their competitors. They have a lot of great players. Like in a lot of series, if you're drafting players from a series, you may take another team's, like you're going to take Giannis first, but then other than maybe Drew and Middleton, most of your next guys are going to be Heat players because Bam, Jimmy, Tyler, et cetera, et cetera. So they have the depth and they have just good, solid all-around play. Getting that home court matters because of that, because you don't have a Giannis that's going to come in and drop 50 in a road setting or whatever. And they're a good road team, don't get me wrong, but it just helps so much for this kind of team who really also feeds off that home crowd that gets a bad reputation for not being passionate or whatever. They're just later rivals.
Yeah, they're later rivals. Yeah, they show up late.
Yeah. Miami, you know what I mean?
Show up late, man. Come on, Miami, they be showing up late, man. Everybody coming off the South.
Some of the fans are my brethren. You know what I'm saying? So I know how it be. Like,
yo, you gotta tell your people stop showing up late, man.
I got family in that area. You know, I got family in Florida. And I don't know if Miami in particular, but definitely in Orlando. But yeah, I think it's a hell of an accomplishment for them. Eric Spoelstra, I don't think he's going to win Coach of the Year, but he should show up on a lot of ballots for sure.
Yeah. See, our man Manny checking in, talking about you got to give Eric Spoelstra credit, which I would agree with. He also said he thinks Eric Spoelstra should be brought up in Coach of the Year talks. I'm with you. I don't think he will. I think there'll be a lot of talk about Monty Williams. There'll be a lot of talk about Taylor Jenkins, rightfully so. He'd be my vote if I had a vote. But yeah, I think, it's one of those things, right, Brian? Like, you expect this out of Eric Spoelstra. He's done it so much that you kind of devalue the greatness of what he's doing, an accomplishment, or taking advantage of opportunity. But we'll get to a little bit more coaching on that later. Okay, so you talked about all the factors about why it's great that they got this number 1 seed, how it can be helpful, the home court advantage. We know the Heat were in the finals a couple years ago in the bubble. So is there pressure on this team right now getting this number 1 seed? That's like, look, you got to get back there. You got to have a really deep playoff run. What's the pressure on the Miami Heat right now as we head into these playoffs?
I don't think it's finals or bust. I also don't think it's house money. It's probably somewhere in the middle because, you're in win now mode. You have guys that are, PJ Tucker's older, Kyle Lowry's older, Jimmy Butler is not old. He's still in his prime, but he's at the back part of his prime, right? And he's going to be in a massive contract extension beginning next season, I believe. So, yeah, you're talking about, or is it the year after, actually? It might be the year after. But basically, the point is that, yeah, there's pressure on them to do really well in the playoffs. If they lose before the Eastern Conference Finals, that's a disappointment. If they get to the Eastern Conference Finals and get washed, that's a disappointment, neither of which I think is going to happen. I think they'll get to the Eastern Conference Finals because we'll talk about like how the playoffs could actually shape up. Yeah. But I think it's shaping up to their advantage, which is something that is worth touching on when we get there. But I think that, your expectation is to get to at minimum the Eastern Conference Finals, give yourself a chance to get to the finals. This is why home court advantage matters, because if that goes 7 games, you're having 4 games on your home floor. And again, you're capable of winning on the road against whomever in this conference. The margins, as we've seen, are very thin in the Eastern Conference. I don't think one team is a hell of a lot better than the other in most cases. I think there are some interesting matchups and matchup problems that we can discuss. But I think for the Heat in particular, like, you want to at least get to the Eastern Conference Finals. You really want to get to the finals, obviously. Give yourself a chance. But if you're one of the final 4 teams standing and you have a great Eastern Conference Finals, I think that's a season to absolutely be proud of. But obviously the players themselves, like, they're going to be disappointed if they don't give themselves a chance to get to the NBA championship. And it is something that is taken for granted because their stability, it's like you almost chalk them up to like, oh, yeah, they're going to be tough and they're going to be a playoff team or whatever. And Ethan Skolnick pointed out something last night, like, this is Pat Riley's 4th successful build with this organization, right? 4th successful build when you're talking about the Tim Hardaway, Alonzo Mourning era. You're talking about Wade and Shaq. You're talking about the Big 3 era. And now with Jimmy Butler and Bam and Tyler Hero, like, they just figure it out in a way that we would want. If we're rooting for teams, we would want all of our favorite teams to sort of operate in that way. So Heat fans could also be very spoiled in that regard. I know from talking to some of them, like, they just kind of always expect to be there or whatever. And, there may come a time where that's no longer the case. But for right now, like, I would say, like, yeah, this shouldn't be taken for granted league-wide at all.
Manny checking in says the Heat will not make it despite being a gritty team. All right. No love for the Heat.
East is tough. So
we'll see. I mean, East is tough, right? It's really tough to see how all this shakes out. Who knows? We will see. So, do you remember a couple weeks ago, Brian? I know you were all over this. I know you were loving it. there was a little bit of beef, or seemed like there was fractures in Heat culture, right? It seemed like that a little bit. We saw a little thing that happened between Udonis Haslem, Jimmy Butler, Eric Spoelstra. And at the time, I was like, look, and I said this, I wasn't going to go and say that Heat culture was done, it was over, it's faults in the team. I thought it was something to keep an eye on. But they closed the season well, right? They played pretty good. Were you worried about that at all? Do you think Heat culture is still strong, or they fine? And is this the kind of team that something like we saw on the court, which happens all the time, people need to relax on that. This stuff happens all the time, more than people realize. But do you think that this was actually a good thing for the team? They would have bounced back. We've seen them close the season strong. They locked up number 1 seed, and everything's fine down in Miami.
And in that organization in particular, it happens a lot. Like, I just heard Bam Adebayo, who was on Zach Lowe's podcast, the Low Post, like this past episode, and he was telling him, like, yo, literally, this is like almost every practice. Like, that kind of happens. And then Zach Lowe was trying to check him, and he was like, you mean like that level? And then Bam was basically like, yeah, like it'll go there sometimes. And, you know, we've heard stories about that with Pat Riley, and you as a Knicks fan know, like in the 90s with Pat Riley being there, you could imagine what was going on at that point. You know, like this is kind of what it is. And the thing that it ultimately came down to, and there's been reporting around this from some of my homies at 5 Reasons Sports, Ethan Skolnick, Rex Sylvander. Basically, the point was that, like, ultimately they were just frustrated that they hadn't been playing well, and it blew up at that point. And there was some passive aggressiveness before that, and then it all came out in that moment. And then after that, they got over it, and they've been on a 5 or 6 game winning streak ever since. And that's something else that, like, it's like, all right, people finally started talking about the Heat nationally, because it's been a lot of Heat, Lakers, and some Celtics lately, and Sixers. But they talked about the Heat for like a day or two, and then the Heat got out of their funk, and now it's all right, back to normal. And it's, again, another example of them being taken for granted. But yeah, I mean, they're tight. They're on the same page, it looks like. The big thing was making the change to the starting lineup, sitting Duncan Robinson, putting in Max Strus, who gives similar spacing, but is also more athletic and more of a type A personality, it would seem. And Max Strus also, like, he's in the game, and Tyler Hero is the first man off the bench, but you have him coming in for Jimmy Butler, who then comes out of the game. And then when he comes in for PJ Tucker and comes in at the 4. So then it's Jimmy Butler, 3 shooters, and one of the centers. And it's like, okay, this is a lineup that makes a lot of sense, because now there's more spacing, better spacing. Jimmy Butler is out here making threes now, which is something I have coming on Basketball News, I think today actually, about like how that can be advantageous to them, and how he doesn't need to necessarily become Anthony Morrow from 3. He just needs to make enough for them to take a half step forward and guard him out there. And then it can open up so many more things for them offensively. So yeah, I think they're going to be fine in terms of chemistry and things of that nature. And they need to be, because again, they don't have a Giannis Antetokounmpo on their team. You know what I mean? So they don't have a Kevin Durant necessarily. So they're going to need that chemistry to rely on that, because when they do have that and they're firing, they could really take out anybody.
They can. Now, in terms of playing anybody, and I just saw Manny put this in the chat, and this leads perfectly into what I wanted to ask next. And I'm going to bring up Manny's comment right here. East is tough, especially when they are ducking the Nets. And here's my thing. And Manny, I know you root for the Nets here. Is anybody ducking the Nets? Have we seen their defense lately? It's looked a little shaky. I'm not necessarily sure what's going on. I believe in the Nets right now, because their defense has looked real suspect. I haven't liked it. Even the Knicks, whose offense is not good, they were giving up points to in the first half. I know they came back and won the game, but I was not in love with the Knicks.
That's more of a Knicks thing. The Knicks just blow leads. It's just like at some point of the game, they just get to the third, fourth quarter, and they're just like, fuck it.
All right, and he said, yes, they are. Playoffs are a different breed. Yeah, which might be worse for them. I'm not necessarily sure. But to what Manny brings up, right? In terms of, he thinks the Heat might have been ducking the Nets, right? Or other teams. So you're saying no.
The Heat aren't
not.
Like
the Heat aren't
ducking. They're not ducking anybody. Last year, people were saying that they should have ducked the Milwaukee Bucks, and they just were like, nah, fuck it, we're gonna play.
That's a good point. There was a lot of talk about that. So that brings me to my question here, which is, who should the Miami Heat want to face in the first round? Is it bring on the Nets? Whatever, bring them on. Whoever comes, is that the attitude right now? Whoever it might be, we'll take them. We ain't scared of nobody. Or is it like Manny says, they're little shook of Brooklyn?
If they want an absolute cakewalk, yeah, and they got swept, Manny, because when you have 7 weeks to prepare from the NBA Finals to training camp, you're not going to have a lot left at the end of the season. That's why all the bubble teams who went into the Final Four last year flamed out very early in the playoffs and didn't win a game in round 2, any of them. But anyway,
wait. Manny, we have to address this comment. You can't be serious here. They got Kessler Edwards ready for action. That's what we're doing. This is who we're hanging our defensive hopes on.
All right,
Nets fans.
All right, Manny, we're gonna push you to the side real quick. Dex, to answer your question.
Go back to the question. Yes.
To answer your question, no, I don't think the Heat are ducking anybody or should be ducking anybody. I think in terms of who they would want to play in the first round. Yeah. I mean, you want the Charlotte Hornets just to have a cakewalk, right? Just to have that little tune-up before you get it deeper into playoffs, but that's not going to happen. I think the Brooklyn Nets are going to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers today, which we're going to probably touch on a little bit later, and they're going to then be the 7th seed. I think they're going to be the 7th seed regardless if they're home or away because it's looking like a matchup with the Cavs, and I don't even know if the Cavs are going to be healthy. By then, the Nets should be good, and they should be able to at least get the 7th seed, which then sets up a potential matchup, likely with the Milwaukee Bucks. As of right now, at least, it could be the Boston Celtics, but we'll see. I think in terms of where that leaves you, if you're the Heat, it's Cleveland Cavaliers or Atlanta Hawks with the outside chances to Charlotte Hornets, and I think you're willing to face either. Cleveland could be more annoying if they're healthy because Atlanta is just not going to stop anybody. And Trae Young is great and as dynamic as he is offensively. If you screen him, he'll just hug you and just, square dance with you to wherever you want to take him. Like he's not even going to try on defense. So it doesn't even matter. And the Heat are going to have their way with the Hawks if that's going to happen. So either one doesn't matter. And if they do end up playing the Nets, if the Nets, squander a game between now and then, which they've done plenty of this season, and they do face the Nets, that's fine. Because the Nets aren't going to have a healthy Ben Simmons. And even if they do, how impactful is he going to be really, given that he hasn't played since last season? And on top of that, you have questions about whether or not the Nets could stop anybody in the backcourt, and the Heat, when they're right, have been a bad matchup for them this season, as we saw at a couple different points. So, we'll see. I don't think that the Nets are going to have to worry about I don't think the Heat are going to have to worry about the Nets necessarily because the Nets should take care of business and get the 7th seed. That'll be Milwaukee's problem. And I actually think Milwaukee wants that matchup. Like, I actually really think Milwaukee wants to take the Nets in the first round and prove to people like, hey, last year wasn't bullshit. So I could see that. If anybody's ducking the Nets, it might be the Celtics because they sat a couple dudes yesterday, second of a back-to-back. But they sat a couple dudes yesterday and just kind of, Milwaukee beat them, and now they're in 3rd. So, I would look at Boston for that. But
yeah, but not okay. Interesting. Listen, whoever the Nets play, I want to see. I think the Nets are always going to be dangerous with KD and Kyrie. I just don't like what I'm seeing from them defensively. Okay, when we look at the Heat this year, I think there's 2 players, Brian, and you're very plugged into this. One is a Bryan Fonseca all-star, kind of. The other has got good development. Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, both of them really good development this year. I think Bam has taken a leap even on the defensive end. We already knew he was a good defensive player. His name should be brought up in Defensive Player of the Year for sure. Tyler Hero, very likely the front runner for 6th Man of the Year. How is their growth really impacting the Heat and being able to get where they are right now and landing that number 1 seed in the East?
Oh, it's been absolutely everything. Like with Bam in particular on the defensive end, and then with Tyler, it's just everything, right? Like on offense, especially because the thing about Tyler, and I remember we've talked about this on the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast, and at the time, people would probably think I'm crazy, but what I was saying last year is that he didn't have an off season between his rookie year and his 2nd season because they only had, again, 7 weeks between losing in the NBA Finals and then the beginning of training camp. So a rookie who finally gets into the NBA doesn't have enough time to really add to his game and, hone in on what they learned from their first seasons, try to adapt to their 2nd season. And all that's to say, Tyler Hero didn't really have time to develop between year 1 and year 2, so you didn't see much development. This year, he had a full off season. and didn't have to play in summer league or anything like that like he did as a rookie, but he had a full off season to go in the lab, had months between the end of the season and this season, so was able to add to his game, really work at it. And there were questions about his work ethic and things of that nature, and he's come out on the other side. He's one of the league's most improved players. I think he'll wind up on some ballast for that, though I don't think he's going to win the award. And he's somebody who is running away with sixth man of the year, and to the point where some people are saying, hey, he's playing too many minutes to win sixth man of the year. When you look at his minutes, he wouldn't even crack the top 5 in sixth man of the year winner history in terms of minutes per game. J.R. Smith has actually played more minutes as a sixth man in the 2012-2013 season than Tyler Hero is right now. And we remember how good J.R. Smith was that year, Dex. That was a fun-ass Knicks team. But, yeah, he's had a massive impact. And he's not even just jacking shots like John Hollinger was saying, a la a Lou Williams or a Jordan Clarkson, because he's actually shooting about 45% from the field, 40% from three. He's doing it efficiently, getting to the line more. His passing, he could still be a little Brett Favre-ish sometimes, but he's making better passes, et cetera, et cetera. And then, bam, he's taking a leap defensively where, like, he's looking like somebody who could consistently challenge for Defensive Player of the Year, year in and year out. He has a real chance this year, despite all the games being missed. And that tells you, like, where he sort of is and how good he's been. I think Defensive Player of the Year is between 3 people. It's Bam Adebayo, Marcus Smart, and Mikal Bridges. And for me, it's really between Bam Adebayo and Marcus Smart. I'm good with either of them winning. I'm fine with Mikal Bridges winning. I just don't think he will necessarily. But Bam, he's the best switch defender in the league. And in the 2017-18 season, when Rudy Gobert won his Defensive Player of the Year, the first one, he only played 56 games. And people were trying to dock Bam for games played. Bam has already played, as many games as Rudy Gobert did. So, he has a chance to win Defensive Player of the Year despite all those games missed because he's that good. And their growth has been essential to them because, this is the present and the future of this team, really.
Yeah, no, I'd agree on both of that. They both had really impressive years. Really impressed with what Tyler Hero's done. You talked about him going back in the lab this offseason and working on his game, and seems to be more focused because there was a lot of questions about that with him after the previous season. Now, the thing for me with the Heat, when I watch the Heat, my one concern, I can have concerns when I look at the Nets on defense. Sometimes with the Heat, I've had some concerns with them on offense. Do they have enough offense for a deep playoff run? Right? I saw, our man Manny in the chat talking about Bam has to step it up offensively. You got to see the version of Jimmy Butler that we saw in the bubble. Do you think this team has enough offensively to get the job done?
Yeah, because their defense is so good where, like, you can close games defensively. People forget that. Like, you can close games by getting stops on defense like they did against the Boston Celtics. It doesn't need to become like a one-on-one bucket fest at the end of games, which that probably wouldn't be advantageous to them compared to some of the other teams in the Eastern Conference who have Giannis Antetokounmpo and Jason Tatum, for example. And potentially the Philadelphia 76ers, though, I don't think they're going to be a big issue for them if they play each other in round 2. But I think the Nets I think the Heat do have enough on offense in order to, like, navigate this because they've proven it at various points during the season. It's probably more Tyler Hero than you would want, but Kyle Lowry being the key here. Like, he's somebody who's come alive late. He's somebody who said the real season starts now or something to that effect. And he's been stepping up, like making the 3-pointers, going to his left and pulling up for the mid-range and setting other guys up. If the ball is in Jimmy Butler's hands less, and not less from the standpoint of him making decisions, but less from the standpoint of him, having isolations and one-on-one. Like, you don't want Jimmy Butler to get the ball in an ISO situation one-on-one because it's just not smart when you have all those other guys there. Their versatility is really the key. Being able to find a PJ Tucker on the corner, being able to set up a Kyle Lowry, pick and roll 3-point situation, or to find Bam as a roller, or Tyler Hero to create something. Like, they have enough there, especially with Kyle Lowry coming alive. And that's really the key here because he's been a good playoff performer. And that's really what it is. Like, their versatility is going to be the key in that setting. So they don't have just one guy that can beat you. They have a few, and they can do it as a collective. And I think that's what's going to be, dangerous to opposing teams.
Yeah, I think it definitely could be dangerous to opposing teams. I just, some games I've seen where they've struggled down the stretch, but you make a good point about how they can get it done in the defensive end and close games in that well too. If you force enough turnovers against the other team. You're hitting free throws, maybe not making the shots in the best way. You brought it up. They don't have a Giannis. They don't have a KD. They don't have that elite level closer. But, we'll see if we can get it done as a team. And there's different ways to win games. So, it's not that bad. Now, the rotation, which you kind of just touched on. What do you think Spoelstra does here? We saw him tinker with some stuff down the stretch. We got to see a little bit of Victor Oladipo. Is he in the rotation? Is Markieff Morris making it back? Or are those guys out right now? What do you think Spoelstra does with the rotation as we head into the playoffs?
I think they're probably breaking case of emergency guys. And given the right matchup, you may need a Markieff Morris depending on how Dwayne Dedmon looks on a particular night. But I think you're looking at, same starting five as they have been the last few games, at least for now. Kyle Lowry, Max Strus, Jimmy Butler, PJ Tucker, Bam Adebayo. Gabe Vincent has to play. He has to be the guard off the bench. And that's primarily why Victor Oladipo, you might not see him much in the playoffs unless, they need some sort of spark offensively that is not being given to them elsewhere. Gabe Vincent, because of what he can do as a point of attack defender, just a pain in the ass. And his 3-point shot has gotten so much better. Like, he was somebody coming into the season, Dex. Like, I just didn't see it in terms of, like, is he even, like, legitimately an NBA player? This is someone who was good at UC Santa Barbara, but that dude typically doesn't really do well in the NBA. And now he's become one of my kind of guys because he plays the type of game that I appreciate from a mid-major, being undrafted, et cetera, et cetera. He's going to be in the playoff rotation. Duncan Robinson, you're going to try him out. And if Duncan Robinson is going to be one of those things where if he has it going, you ride him. And if he doesn't, you cut bait early, And Caleb Martin is really the key here because he's somebody who, one, he needs rest because he's had some lower leg injuries toward this last portion of the season. But Caleb Martin's been really good, and he's been essentially the PJ Tucker backup, right? And then from there, it's like, okay, is Victor Oladipo going to play much? Is Markieff Morris going to play much? Probably not. And, that's not fine. That's more so just circumstances, right? And that's the thing. Like, Victor Oladipo came back late in the year. Markieff Morris came back late in the year. So it's been really challenging to sort of work them back into the rotation. And that's part of why they had their blow up, right? Not on them in particular, but the constantly changing guys and constantly changing the rotation because guys are constantly in and out of the lineups. Like, that could be a pain in the ass for anybody. And just like anything in life, you could only overcome it but so many times before it just gets annoying. And it's like, all right, how many times am I going to be able to overcome this, right? And that's sort of where that leaves you. But other than that, yeah, and Dwayne Dedmon, you should obviously see him off the bench first as a big man, but there could be a series where Markieff Morris is really the guy to give you that sort of look and scoring punch. I think between Markieff and Victor Oladipo, you're more likely to see Markieff
I can see that
consistently just because stylistically the fit, what he can give you. Victor Oladipo has been more up and down, but he also had like a very serious injury that he's working his way back from.
Speaking of up and down, right? Duncan Robinson's been up and down. I know he's been up and down with the Heat fans on social media this year.
Very divisive player.
Right. Now, we know this is a good, interesting guy to talk about in terms of the rotation because we know that he got it done in the bubble. Granted, it was the bubble, and he shot the ball very well in the postseason. But if he's not shooting the ball well, is he a guy that you think Spoelstra is going to have a quick leash with and just be like, all right, maybe we get him out of here. Maybe we try to see if we get a spark with Oladipo. What do you think with Duncan Robinson and how they use him in the playoffs, particularly because he's got some liabilities on defense?
I just pulled up his game log, right? So his last, what is this? 7 games. His last 7 games. This is funny. This includes 5 off the bench and 2 starts. The first 2 are starts. This was Duncan Robinson's minutes distribution. Last 7 games. 23, 13, 25, 15, 24, 13, 27. So it's very up and down.
I I don't know what Spoelstra was tinkering with there, but it sounds like, if he ain't got it going.
That's kind of what it is. And he's like, you need more actions to get him open because he's not going to take somebody off the dribble. Now, Look, to his credit, there's been times this season where like he stepped up, taking a 3 off the dribble, not just had to catch a shoot and pass it away as much as he was doing before. He still does that. But yeah, there's that. There's been times where he's driven in, give you a nice little floater, find a nice pass like to Bam cutting or something like that, or PJ Tucker in the corner. Like he's done that occasionally, but for the most part, and to go back to those games that we were just talking about, those 7, the points, 6, 0, 15, 5, 8, 0, 21. Like that's kind of what it is. It's like it's a roller coaster. It's like, and Spo, I think it's kind of like we used to say this as Jet fans about certain quarterbacks, Geno Smith, Mark Sanchez. You kind of know in the first quarter whether or not they're gonna have a good game. Like you kind of see it early, and then it's like it can become dicey from there. So with Duncan, and the good thing is that it's basketball, so it's not, you could sub somebody out or whatever the case may be. I think Duncan, what you would say when he was in the starting lineup is, okay, he'll play the first 6 minutes of the first quarter. If he doesn't have it going, you try it again the first 6 minutes of the third quarter. If he doesn't have it going, that's it. That's it for the game. If he does have it going, then you go back to him in the second, et cetera, et cetera. Off the bench, late first quarter minutes, maybe he closes a second. And then from there, you got to determine whether or not he has it. And this is where Victor Oladipo could come in handy, because if Duncan Robinson doesn't really have it, and if Gabe Vincent is struggling with a shot, you're going to look to Victor Oladipo, and that's going to be advantageous there. And also Tyler Hero. I don't even know if I mentioned him before. We were talking about rotation. Tyler Hero is obviously going to be there because that's going to be your guy closing games. In your closing lineup pretty much every night. So
yeah, he's definitely going to be there. All right, that rotation is going to be very, very, very interesting to watch for me. Okay, final question before we wrap up this portion of it. It's the $1 million question. It's a question everybody's going to want to know about the Heat. Can they return to the finals and win it all? Can the Miami Heat actually get this done outside the bubble, show the world the Heat culture? Can they return to the finals and finally win it all?
I think they can. I would not put them as favorites or anything like that. I would say, like, if I'm making a power ranking of teams to come out of the Eastern Conference, I would put them second behind the Milwaukee Bucks, but I absolutely think they could beat the Milwaukee Bucks, given that they do have home court advantage for that series, and that's going to help. I would not favor them in that series, but I would absolutely give them a look if I were betting on that series. I don't know if anybody's going to beat the Phoenix Suns this year. It seems like it's their finals to lose. And just elsewhere in the Western Conference, I don't know if the Golden State Warriors are going to get right or right enough to where they can really, contend for a championship. Does Memphis have enough? And are they going to show their lack of experience early on? Does Dallas have enough to really make a run? Denver, are they going to get some guys back? Are the Clippers going to get Kawhi back, et cetera, et cetera? And then in the East, Robert Williams. As a center shaving off part of your meniscus, I don't expect him to return at 100%. And I think that's going to be tough. He should come back if they're in round 2, and they should get to round 2, but that's going to be tough, man. And it's going to be a lot to ask of him. So you're going to need some good play from Daniel Tyson, Al Horford. And then I just don't really believe in the Sixers, and I'm not sure that the Nets, they're setting themselves up for a tough first round matchup, whoever it is, whether it's the Bucks, the Celtics, or the Heat. It's probably going to be the Bucks. And are you picking the Nets to take out the Bucks? So I think the way things shake out, the Heat in terms of playoffs, you're more or less getting what you want. You want the Bucks, Celtics as the 2-3 because you don't want to have to go through both of them. They can, but you'd rather only have to go through one of them. Yeah. You want the Sixers or Raptors in 4 or 5 to get them in round 2, presuming that you get by round 1, which obviously you should if you're the 1 seed. Because the Sixers, they just match up well with, I don't believe in James Harden. And Joel Embiid in the playoffs, it's a little dicey when Jimmy Butler's not there. And then when you're talking about the Raptors, they're tough, and I actually think they could beat the Sixers. And we still don't. There's some vaccination questions that we may have about the Sixers as well. But the Raptors are tough, and they have 2 all-star caliber players on their team, at least one of whom could make All-NBA this year. So you're getting what you want in terms of how this shakes out, where you're going to get maybe the Sixers or Raptors in round 2, and then potentially the Bucks or Celtics, most likely the Bucks in round 3. And can you get by the Bucks? And then that'll give you a chance to see if you could win it all or not.
It could be a pretty favorable draw for the Heat, man. So it's going to be really interesting to see. All right, that's enough about Heat talk. Bryan can talk about this all day for sure, guys. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Bryan's going to do Friday NBA picks with me. Some good games tonight. A lot to talk about in terms of shaping up and how things go with the NBA schedule. If you are looking to bet, we are going to help you with that. Win you some money. I'm not trying to guarantee you nothing, but we got a pretty good track record up here. We'll do that when we come back on the NBA Exchange. Are you looking for a better way to play player props or daily fantasy sports? Well, look no further than Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the leading over-under daily fantasy game. Why? Because it's so easy to use and win. You can make your picks in under 30 seconds and win up to 10 times your money in one day. Right now, we have a special offer for our viewers and listeners of the NBA Exchange. All you got to do is sign up now and use the promo code NBAEX. Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Yep, that's right. They'll match your first deposit up to $100. So, join the over 150,000 others who found a better way to play and download the Prize Picks app today. All right, we're back on the NBA Exchange. Going to talk about some NBA picks right now. Some really interesting games. Still a lot to be determined in terms of seeding, not just only for people who are already locked into playoff berths, but also in terms of the play-in. Brian, I'm going to let you start because I know you're starting with a big one tonight here in Cleveland. It will be the Nets and the Cavs. That's your first game tonight. Who do you like in this contest?
Huge game, Nets Cavs, because this could very well be the 7-8 matchup in the play-in, yep. And they're kind of playing for home court right now. The Nets are favored by 8.5. I think that's a big number. I do think the Nets will win, but their money line is, as of right now, in that minus 340 range, so you're not getting a ton of value there. In terms of like looking at the FanDuel odds, and obviously I use FanDuel because you already know they paid a boy. I would say Nets will win, but I may go alternate spread because I could see them just sort of messing around and not really put it away the way that they should. Evan Mobley is questionable as of right now. I just checked the injury report. Jared Allen is out, which is part of why the number is the number. Alternate spread could be minus 5.5, 6.5, something along those lines. There's also a world, though, if you're feeling real confident in the Nets, where they come out, they're inspired, and they're like, all right, fuck this, and just blow the Cavs out by like 15, 20 points, which I could see that happening as well, which would explain the line. But Vegas knows a little bit better than me. But I would say for me, I will probably play it safe and go like Nets minus 5.5 or something along those lines.
I'm eyeing this game for tonight, and I would play it the same way too. Minus 5.5, take that alternate spread. Just don't trust the Nets in terms of, could they blow them out? Sure. Could they also make it really close? Yeah. Because their defense hasn't been playing that great. Yeah, I could see that. But I like the way you're betting that. I like the Nets here, but 8.5 is a little bit much for me. Sometimes you just got to get those wins. I know you want to hit on those minus.
See the ball go in, baby.
just get them wins, man. Just get them wins. Singles work too, man. Move those runners along. All right, my first game of the night. We're gonna keep it with New York City here. The New York Knicks. They will be down in the nation's capital, battling the Washington Wizards. Yes, that line is correct that you see from FanDuel here. It is minus 0.5 point, which means all the Knicks got to do is win by one or more. But all you need to do, this is a pick 'em basically, right? If my rule of thumb generally, if it's minus 3.5 or whatever, anything within 3 points, just go with the money line, right? Like this is where you go play the money line. Who do you like here? Is this a sexy matchup? Hell no. It's not a sexy matchup at all whatsoever. The Knicks young kids have been playing pretty good outside of the second half of the game against Brooklyn the other day. I think they'll play hard in this one. This is a game that actually, in a weird way, can actually determine where these teams will be in the lottery because they're currently tied. So it's interesting, but the players don't care about that. They want to play hard. They want to win. I think the Knicks players have been playing hard. I think they'll want to bounce back from the loss against the Nets the other night. I like them to win this outright. Throw a couple dollars on the Knicks, but the Knicks could be the Knicks. So you don't put too much money because they're the Knicks. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't know if you necessarily want to trust that. But I like the Knicks here. I can see the Knicks winning anywhere from 6 to 7 points. I just think their players will be more motivated. Obi Toppin's been playing really well. Look for him in terms of over-unders on player props in terms of points. I think that's a way you can look at. He's been really good, especially been shooting the ball well from three. Anything with him over maybe 12, 13 points. Nice play to go there with the over. But I like the Knicks in this one. It's basically a pick 'em, but take the Knicks because everybody beats the Wiz. What's your second game? What you got, Brian?
My next one is just sort of sticking with the Eastern Conference playoff theme. Went with the Chicago Bulls and Charlotte Hornets, who have a big game tonight. Now to set this up, The Atlanta Hawks played Heat, and the Heat are actually
Mm-hmm.
+2 right now, even though they're at home. That tells you that, some guys may sit because they have the 1 seed already. I don't know like how that's going to sort of happen. The Hawks winning would also be interesting because they are currently tied with the Nets. I think the Nets have the tiebreaker there. I'm not even sure.
They do. They do.
Okay, so the Nets do have a tiebreaker there. And the Hawks, they would be tied if they do beat the Heat tonight, 43-38 right now. And they would be tied with the Cavs, who would then drop to 43-38. So just a couple of things to watch there. And I'm bringing all this up now because the Charlotte Hornets don't want to lag behind, even though they just whooped the Orlando Magic last night. They're on the second of a back-to-back, and they're going to play the Chicago Bulls. The Chicago Bulls are 6, and it could get dicey if the Bulls lose this game and then the Cavs beat the Nets, because there's a scenario where that happens and they're a game apart or whatever the case may be. So, and the Bulls have free fallen. DeMar DeRozan was getting MVP conversations earlier, whatever. So the spread for this game is Bulls -2.5. And Dexter, I like your rule because I pretty much operate the same way. I don't like NBA spreads in general because teams just be fucking around, especially at this time of the year. I'm sort of saving more of my money for the playoffs. Bulls are favored by -2.5 against the Charlotte Hornets on the second of a back-to-back. I think they will win. They should cover.
Wait, the Bulls? Okay.
Yeah, at that point, because it's the money line. But I would entertain. I just don't know if the Hornets have it in them. But I will entertain because they had a blowout last night.
Right.
That they were, able to maybe rest a little bit toward the end. Look, they need this win because they don't want to fall too far behind, because then you may finish 10th anyway, but you're putting yourself in a position where like you're going to be 10th regardless. And then you're talking about being in Atlanta that first game, which is not, it's winnable, but you don't want to put yourself in that position because then it's like, all right, you beat Atlanta on the road and then here's Kevin Durant. So
yeah,
I'm still taking the Bulls though.
You're taking the Bulls in this one. All right, Bulls 2.5. Bulls have not been playing good, but you make a great point. This is why I love the playing tournament. There's so much motivation. The Bulls need to win because they're trying to hold on to 6. They right now, who they match up with in the first round right now? Celtics, right? They beat Celtics right now in the first round. They're trying to hold on to 6 to make sure they can do that. So there's a lot of motivation for these teams. To Brian's point, this is why it's so tricky to bet at this time of year and with these spreads. If it's this low, like we're saying, and it's under 3.5, under 4 points, just go with who you think's going to win, man. Like, just take that money line and go with who you think's going to win. The odds probably are not going to be as good. They're usually not as good, but go with who you think's going to win. Okay, my last game of the night. This is basically another pick-em here. All right? Now, it's going to be interesting. This is the Suns versus the Jazz. Okay? And Brian, you know this. I have no faith in the Jazz in anything. I think things are ending in Utah. I think it's going to be a very interesting offseason. I think they're breaking things up. I think this is the beginning of the end. Or the beginning of the end actually might have been last playoffs, if we really think about it. The beginning of the end might have been that, right? Suns versus Jazz. You're looking at this, and you're like, Jazz -1.5 here. And you're like, okay, the Suns, they've clinched everything. They've clinched the best record. They got the franchise record for wins. They're not playing for anything. The other night, they sat everybody, all their stars. Booker sat, Ayton sat, Chris Paul sat as well, too. I would expect them to do the same again. However, here's the thing. The Suns still play hard without them. This is kind of like the Memphis Grizzlies things that we see without Ja. The Suns still play hard. That's why the line is what it is at -1.5. That's why we're seeing that right now. The Suns still play hard. Now, do you trust the Jazz? Not really. Don't trust them. Don't trust the Jazz all the time. But here's the thing. The Jazz do have some motivation here, guys. They do actually have some reasons to be motivated in this contest. The Jazz currently, they are 5th. They have a very outside chance. They're probably going to be locked into this outside chance. They're 2 games behind the Mavericks, with both teams having 2 left to play. Okay, so the Jazz need to win out, and they need some help from the Mavericks and them to lose out, because I believe the Mavericks own the tiebreaker in the season series. So they're motivated. I think they get this because they'd like to get home court against the Mavericks. That's also something we'll get into later. I think if they play in the series, I'm definitely picking the Mavericks. But I'm going to go with the Jazz here, reluctantly. I do not think I would trust it. It's nice that the line is low. I would say just take the Jazz with the money line. Because the line is low, you'll get some decent odds. They should get it done. The Jazz have been floundering, but would it shock anybody if Phoenix won? No. If you're going to take this, like the Knicks, be cautious, throw a couple dollars down, nothing too big. Don't put your faith in the Jazz. But I would say I like the Jazz here, probably squeaking out a win, maybe by 6 points over the Phoenix Suns, because I just have respect for how the Suns have played and how I think they will play in this game, despite really having nothing to play for at all.
That's interesting because the Jazz right now, I just pulled up the standings, are fifth with 48 and 32. The Nuggets are right on their heels, right on their ass at 48 and 33.
That's the other thing too, B. You're right. I was just looking at it in terms of where they can move up, but you're right. The Nuggets right on their ass, and they don't want to drop to 6. I don't think so. I don't think they, because that'll put them against the Warriors, and the Warriors, who had a great comeback win against them last week, they got no fear of the Jazz at all.
Honestly, the Jazz don't have a great matchup either way, because then either that or it's like it's going to be Luka versus Rudy Gobert in pick and roll. And look, man, like the Dallas Mavericks, they got Spencer Dinwiddie balling out there. I love Dorian Finney-Smith. You might see him on the All-Bryan team this year. That dude just makes plays. But look, they're a 50-win team in Dallas. And I was saying at the beginning of the year, look, man, like I wouldn't be surprised if they made a run a little sooner than we expected, and they traded Porzingis in order to do that. So that's an interesting matchup, and like, yeah, it's really tough to trust the Jazz because they just have so many holes from a basketball standpoint, but it's clearly beyond that. For me, it's also just like you could tell they just don't like each other. Tim McMahon has been saying this on Windhorse's podcast, The Hoop Collective, every week. He just sort of like he's not gonna get. Good reporters, you know this, Dex. They're not going to tell you everything they know. But we can all tell.
They give you little stuff here.
Yeah, we can tell. We could tell, reading between the lines of everything Tim McMahon reports on the Jazz.
Speaking of that, I caught this yesterday. And this is like typical team damage control. They had Gobert go on NBA Today, and he's being interviewed by Malika Andrews and talking about what his relationship is with Rudy Gobert. Who's doing this interview with 2 games left to go in the season? That's because the noise is growing louder. They know the pressure is on out there. I'm with you. I don't care if the Mavs are in the road team or the home team. I'm taking the Mavs because the problem with the Jazz is they can't guard in the perimeter, particularly because their perimeter defenders are so terrible. And you're asking Rudy Gobert to do so much work that nobody can legitimately do. Their perimeter defense is terrible. It has not been addressed. Remember when people thought Rudy Gay was going to help them? Well, he's not even in the rotation.
And then Dallas's defense is also really good.
And deserves. Yeah, it's been impressively good. Yo, that's a series, and we'll be talking about some stuff next week on A Hartel Podcast and this show. That's a series, if it happens, that I'm very confident Luka's getting his first playoff series win. Like, I'm very confident in that. Like, I will bet that I'm saying it now. Mavs in 5.
Yo, honestly, if we're being real, Luka, both times that he's been in the playoffs, really should, like, I don't want to say should have won both times, but like, if not for the Porzingis injury the first time, and then if not for Kawhi Leonard just doing the Kawhi Leonard shit those last 5 quarters, like, I mean, Luka's been right there both times. I think he has a better team now, though, specifically on defense. And
I agree.
Against Utah, a team that's like on the verge of implosion, that's gonna be a lot of theater there.
It's gonna be a lot. It's gonna be a lot of theater. But
and then if we get Mavs Suns after that, hey, I'm all for that because that'll be a lot of fun.
I'm all for it. But Utah. We'll get to the Utah Jazz another day. Might be having to play taps for them soon in a couple weeks. We might have to do that. We might have to play taps on them. Thank you to everybody for checking in with us. We appreciate you. Our man Manny, appreciate you checking in. He said Nets in 2.
2 playing games. Yeah,
2 playing games. All right, I like the energy around the Nets. I'm sure we'll be talking some Nets next week around the playing. Please check out Bryan Fonseca. Check out his show, Bahama Rican Boys, with our man Timmy on 5 Reasons Sports Network. They're fantastic there. Also check out his work on FanDuel, especially if you're plugged in to the combat sports. A lot of great stuff with me and Brian coming up soon. We're talking NBA awards next week on the podcast. All Brian team is coming up. You know what I mean? I might have to start making an all Dexter team. I'm not quite sure what that is, but we might have to start doing that as well too. We might have to do that. Okay, and Manny says he will be at the playing game next week. We're going to check in with you to see if you're okay, Manny, if the Nets win or they lose, man. We got to check in on you after that. Brian, thanks for joining me. Good to talk some Heat basketball. We will do this again. at some point during the playoffs, because I don't think the Heat will have a early exit like the Utah Jazz, but we will do that. Good seeing you as always.
Yes.
As usual, people, please follow, support the NBA Exchange at the NBA Exchange on all social media platforms. Check us out. He's Bryan Fonseca. I'm Dexter Henry. This is not the Ain't Hard to Sell podcast, but until next time, y'all. Peace.